Hello. Something happened today that's funny and emblematic and a great way of explaining what it is I'm looking at and absolutely lamenting about not just the Bitcoin space now, but the crypto space. So Monero started getting 51% attacked. Someone came out and was like, I control the network now. I'm economically motivated. I'm making loads of money doing this. You can all just accept it. And everyone basically did, as far as I know. I haven't seen any pushback against it. But what hurts so much is that the price has barely fallen as a result, even though we know now that this decentralized cryptocurrency basically you can only use it if one entity on the planet says you can use it. Now that's more centralized pretty much than the US dollar at this point. There are more than one bank you can use. There is more than one bank you can use. There is only one miner in Monero now. It's the most centralized payment network in existence, pretty much as a result of this. And what kills me about it is that is the attitude that exists over there. I don't know, there's probably some Monero heads pretty upset about it, but if the price hasn't really fallen, then it presumably doesn't matter that much. Or maybe none of the people can move their Monero onto exchanges to dump it in a panic, so they're forced hodlers, even though they've lost all confidence in their currency. But Monero was never about decentralization anyway. But here's the thing. I'm not using this video to dunk on Monero or their community. I'm using it to point out, are we any better? Because this has been my contention for ages. What makes Bitcoin unique versus these other currencies? Why do we get to say Bitcoin, not crypto? And I think that we don't have any leg to stand on with that at the moment. We've completely had the rug pulled out from underneath us. And I mean that in a sense of our community having been usurped, rather than, a centralized entity say, I'm going to start censoring or doing something that would undermine Bitcoin. We never had that centralized entity really, but we've had pockets of centralization. And strangely, it wasn't really the miners that abused their position, and it was the developers. But here's what it is, because it comes down to more than filters for me. This is the war I've been fighting for the last 2 years. Filters are just emblematic. They're not the parent issue. The parent issue is something that was always going to happen in Bitcoin. And it was always a question of whether you could, how long you could hold back the tide, or if you could do it permanently, or if it was just a completely hopeless thing. And looking at filters as just the fact that we no longer want to do what we're supposed to be doing with spam filtration, and we're undermining all of the ways in which we used to do stuff in that regard. That's a symptom, and it's going to result in there being lots more spam in the chain and less people being motivated to run nodes. We understand that, but I'm going to say that's not where the issue begins. The issue begins with us just having changed. Bitcoin was born out of a community, out of a culture that had just gone through the global financial crisis. That was essentially, it was relevant to it. Ron Paul's message around the Occupy time was drawing endless attention to the Federal Reserve and the illegitimacy of the monetary system as a whole. And we watched it scam everyone to the biggest extent I'd ever seen with the bailouts, masses of money printing, complete destruction of the middle class. We watched it happen overnight. And we watched them use money as a mechanism to do that. And the game was clearly just rigged from that point on. And we needed a fair monetary system. And Bitcoin was that. It was the currency and the payment network all rolled into one. And it was fair and neutral. And everyone that wanted to be a part of that wanted to protect that for being what it was. There was never any of this stupid bullshit that you hear today about, oh, well, the database that runs that can also be used to store smart contracts that can settle futures contracts in other contexts that might be interesting, and NFTs and all this absolute junk. That was nothing to do with any of the motivation for what brought people to Bitcoin and what fostered the community and got it to grow. The idea of a fair, neutral money. And when things would come in to attack that and undermine it, like spammy casino things like Satoshi Dice being built on top of Bitcoin and just filling the chain up with trash, everyone understood back then that that was an attack and it was something you did something about. We don't understand that stuff anymore. And that results in us not updating filters. Fair enough. I understand why we don't fix the filters if that's your attitude, because I want to understand why that attitude now permeates the space. And it reaches out into other areas. If we suddenly somehow browbeat Core and the rest of the community into fixing the filters, and they worked or they didn't work, That is not the end goal for me here with this whole war. People keep saying, what is it you want? What is it you really want to get here? And what I want is just to try and hold back the tide of decay that is turning everything slowly but surely into something worse than it used to be. And I don't just mean Bitcoin, I mean everything. I mean things just slowly rotting from the inside out. Institutions that once were good slowly getting worse. This is just society writ large. It's not specific to Bitcoin. Bitcoin was great. It was always going to get degraded somewhat and suffer from mass adoption from people with no understanding of how to make a great thing remain great, beyond empty mantras about, oh, Bitcoin fixes itself and all these silly things that people just don't understand, right? Like I've heard this over and over again, Bitcoin fixes itself somehow. And this became a meme a couple of days ago. People understood where I was coming from with it while I was ranting about it in a Twitter Spaces. But the way I thought about it was I used to be scared of flying when I was a kid until I realized that this isn't an inanimate object that can just randomly fall out of the sky. There's a guy in charge of this called a pilot who feels the same way I do. He doesn't want to die. And if and when we get somewhere safely, it's not because planes know how to fly themselves. It's because a human is in charge that's going to make sure the plane does what it should do. And you can trust that motivation. And that's how Bitcoin works. Bitcoin doesn't fix itself any more than a plane can fly itself or get itself out of trouble if it flies into a storm or something. It's the people involved in it with the interest of keeping it on track that make it do what it does. And you can't ever discredit them or, fail to credit them with being the ones that make it work right. So Bitcoin doesn't fix itself. Its people relentlessly do by having some sort of overarching human concept about what this thing's supposed to be and the problem it's supposed to solve, and constantly, pulling out the weeds and keeping it in that box that it's supposed to exist in. And then you get all these bright-eyed idiots, kids come along and say, well, what if it could do that? What if we could do this and the other? And they delude themselves into thinking they can understand all the implications of changes they want to make. The massive change they want to make right now, which is being swept under the rug as nothing, is getting rid of spam filters. And that's why I say it's emblematic, because that attitude permeates everything here. They want to change everything about it because they don't understand what gave it life in the first place. They don't understand the motivation for it. And during the debate, it's really annoying because I've criticized Bitcoin Core as an institution. I've called it corrupt. I've said they're attacking Bitcoin, but I haven't spoken about people personally, even though I know some of what's going on in that regard. But I'm not a part of Bitcoin Core. I don't really know any of the core devs, only a couple of them. And watching what's going on there, the retorts to me from the people like Antoine and Gloria, and they're always, and from the Bitcoin Magazine employees that we all know, it's always personal attacks against me. Mechanic's just doing this for attention. He's a liar. Like, I'm getting told this endlessly, and it's always a personal attack against me. It's that I'm a clown and I don't know what I'm talking about, and that I'm misleading people. And Ocean is running this campaign to trick people into running knots. And not that Ocean would ever make a penny from anyone doing that anyway, but the point is, it's the disingenuousness of that and the personalness of that. Like, I've been on Spaces all day and I'm getting personally called a clown and an idiot and like a slimy piece of shit and all this stuff. Like, this is the stuff people are saying about me personally. I don't think that of anyone inside Core. I'm being far more mild than that. But that's what makes it so scathing, I guess, my critique, when I'm just saying, I think you guys don't really know what you're doing. And this is like way more deep of an insult than these horrible, like, nasty things that are getting slung at me. They're just because I just genuinely feel like you weren't there at the beginning. When I look at the history of some of the core developers, I'm seeing ICO scams. I'm seeing things like that tell me, you're a crypto migrant. You're someone that was working on Ethereum land, and you have some competence as a developer, so now you're over here, but you have absolutely no knowledge about monetary networks and about economics. You don't necessarily have that kind of knowledge. You're obviously a clever person, but that doesn't mean you don't have blind spots, and it doesn't mean you're not ideologically screwed up. And sad to say, so many people, a disproportionate amount of people anyway, that are experts in computer science, if they've had any formal education or higher education in that regard, went to some nutcase college that indoctrinated them with insane ideology. And so when I look at that, that's another cultural comment, right? That's not a technical comment, and that's why I keep saying this is not a technical debate. The technical debate is settled. It's basically a non-issue. If you filter or you don't filter, it doesn't really make that much difference to any technical aspect of Bitcoin. I'm going to double down on my assertion that this is a cultural phenomenon, and that the Bitcoiners of 2011, 2013, back then, it would have been an absolute no-brainer to fix the filters. Does that make Bitcoin perfect money, and does that bring it back from the edge of destruction? No, it doesn't. But a community that would choose one thing over the other completely defines the trajectory of the project long-term. That's what people aren't understanding about this. And there are other things that are emblematic of that too. It's not just the filters. It goes into the conference space, especially where you end up, the developer-heavy conferences. They're insane. But it's not just that. Let's start with the Bitcoin Magazine conference. That was just an absolute onslaught of cringy suits talking about stable coins and how you don't need to take custody of your own coins anymore because of all these wonderful solutions. You don't need to be a cypherpunk anymore. That's in the past. We've left that era behind us. And then you just have all this buddying up with the Trump administration. These guys are absolutely in it for themselves. They just want to... I made some joke about it being the Donald dump after he pumped his... whatever it was, his stupid currency. It didn't even last 24 hours, I think. How long did Melania coin last? These people are not Bitcoiners, and buddying up with them is an absolute Faustian bargain. It's going to bite us in the ass. And it's not a good move at all. You want hostile politicians. You want politicians treating Bitcoin like a threat, because then you live in reality. You don't want politicians treating you like friends. That's not a good situation to be in, because people just don't have the capacity to operate like that. They trust politicians. They can't help it. People, and we're in that situation now where we've buddied up to them, all of these suits trying to say, don't buy Bitcoin, buy my stock instead of Bitcoin. It's better. I can engage in a bunch of financial engineering on your behalf. And for a small cut, I will make you more gains than if you just bought simple Bitcoin. And you go, yeah, all right, it's gone up so much. I can outpace the network. This is the same scam as crypto. It's the same. It's a different vehicle for it, but it's the same psychological appeal to greed, saying, just buy Bitcoin. Where's the fun in that? No, you need to buy some Bitcoin treasury company that's going to do a bunch of fun things you don't really understand, and they're going to print money out of thin air, and somehow that's going to end up in your pocket as more Bitcoin. And you tell yourself, this makes me a super maxi, not just a maxi. And I see so many people pushing this and acting like it's a harmless thing to do. And I don't really want to be an apologist for it, because some of the people that do it, I'm like, yeah, I don't have a problem with this dude. Like, he seems fair enough, and he's done his research, and he's into, he's into financialization or whatever. Okay, fair enough. But I'm sorry, it's just not Bitcoin. It's not why we're here. And why do we need to be like that? You can be middle class, and for it to be a fine thing. Middle class in the world where people are really genuinely using Bitcoin without all the nonsense and the noise is a great place to be. You don't need to be super rich or on a treadmill trying not to be completely broke. Those are not the only two options that are available to you. You have something much more abundant. You have a much more freedom in a world that uses Bitcoin as its standard. And that's what we're moving towards. And that's been good enough. That has been your life for however long you've been a Bitcoiner anyway. Maybe you go through one cycle, or maybe it took two. But once you've been through that, the pressure is off financially. If you were disciplined for a while and you managed to build up a decent sized stash and you went through a couple of hype cycles, you should be in a good spot now. You're not on the treadmill anymore. You should be okay. You don't need to start playing games with the devil and getting involved in these silly games that now make up the entire conference space is now filled with these people that have nothing but contempt for our values, that want to undermine them and make Bitcoiners fall for all the same tricks. And the problem with that is people say, look, Bitcoin's going to get big. We're not going to be able to control this thing. Like, learn to relax about the things you can't do, be a stoic. And I just don't buy that at all, because the problem is Bitcoin can go global and everyone can adopt it, and we can all celebrate the fact that this thing is really hard and it's difficult in the sense that it's difficult to change, and it's not going to be kicked around and bullied and warped into things it isn't super easily, but it's not completely immune. And when these cultural elements of degradation inevitably seep over into the developer world, then it starts affecting the actual Bitcoin nodes people run, and they're what gives us our unique differentiator between the rest of crypto. Suddenly that line in the sand that we spent all those years trying to establish, all that bad energy where we had to fight and fight and fight against all these crypto people trying to tell us they were the same as Bitcoin or they were better than Bitcoin. And we've watched that happen for so long. We drew this firm line in the sand saying, Bitcoin, not crypto. I want a hardware wallet that only has Bitcoin. I don't want the others. We made all those companies, even if they were, full of nonsense altcoins, they would always release a firmware that was Bitcoin only, just as a virtue signal to appease us and our demands of the fact that we don't want to associate Bitcoin with all this other garbage. And people have come in now and they've just iterated on their approach in trying to undermine people. Because when it was just Bitcoin and crypto, it was great because all of the scammers were in the crypto space and they didn't come near Bitcoin. They were just trying to increase their stash. Maybe they understood how good Bitcoin was, but they wanted to take advantage of the fact that other people didn't, and they would sell them on these, scams. But now the scams have iterated so many times that crypto is just dead at this point, and they have to come into Bitcoin and run their scams on top of Bitcoin because they need the association with what Bitcoiners have built, this system of trust and integrity and genuine decentralization. They look at that and they go, I need that. Otherwise, no one is going to believe in my scam and fall for it again. And so they did that. They started building their scams on top of Bitcoin itself. And instead of Bitcoiners from 2011, 2012, 2013 being around and having the reaction of saying, get rid of all this stuff immediately, don't relay it around the network, don't invite these people to conferences. Why do you have this guy up on stage? Why do you have this guy that's been pushing for big blocks and other malicious changes to Bitcoin? Why is he speaking at a developer conference? Why? Why do we have any interest in hearing what this guy has to say? He's clearly a bad actor. What's he doing up here? Why are these people not getting chased out with pitchforks? So it's seeped over into the development landscape, and it's just you've reached a tipping point where there are enough Bitcoiners now that go, I meet Bitcoiners that are like, they've read the Bitcoin standard and they understand the economic implications of having this thing, and they love it and they're committed and they've been in for years, and they still haven't ever run a Bitcoin node. Ever. I meet people that have been miners in the space for over 10 years that know more about the mining side of the industry than anyone knows about anything else. And they've never run a node. They've never set up their own Stratum server. They're doing it all in some haphazard way where they're connecting thousands of ant miners to a remote Stratum server, and they're on some stranded oil field somewhere, and they have terrible internet over Starlink, and their latency is disgraceful, and they're wasting loads of electricity because they haven't even set up a proxy. I've seen loads of people do stuff like this. And I'm saying when it gets into the weeds of technical issues inside Bitcoin Core, nearly everyone at this point just goes, I just don't understand this. Despite that, 16% of the node runners out there have switched over and away from Core, given what's happened, which is an unbelievable phenomenon, given what I'm talking about contextually here. So I'm saying big picture. Forget about the filters for a minute. Obviously, I want them fixed, but again, to repeat it for the millionth time in this rant, it's an emblematic thing. Those guys, the filters being naturally fixed gives me confidence in Bitcoin as a community. And as I've said before, I hate the over-the-top appeal to sovereign individual, radical libertarian ideology that permeates the space to the point where we have to pretend there isn't a community and a circumstance that groups us together and makes us think similarly and work together to build a thing and bootstrap it. That's what it took to get Bitcoin going. It took so many miraculous coincidences to bring everything together. It took the fact that drugs were illegal so that people needed a payment network that they could use for that. Nothing else works for that because drugs are so small and so light, but so expensive for their weight that they become practical for people to send around using casual things like the post, and they can pay for it using Bitcoin. If drugs had all been legal, there would have been no incentive to bootstrap with Bitcoin. And as much as people might want to shake off that nasty association, that was Bitcoin and freedom holding hands and promising to support one another and reinforce one another. And it was beautiful because it was two things. It was restrict people's ability to spend their money and make certain substances illegal. The fact that they did both of those things meant that those things fixed one another. And it was beautiful at the time. Obviously, it didn't last. And, I'm at a different place in my life where I'm a lot less interested in drugs than I was when Bitcoin first showed up. But nonetheless, the beauty and the poetry of those things correcting one another, needing the war on drugs to help bootstrap Bitcoin and needing Bitcoin to help end the war on drugs, it was just perfect. And then you had, the gutlessness of the entire journalistic enterprise. And you had Julian Assange come along and be the first journalist with a backbone in forever who couldn't receive any money, and Bitcoin was perfect for that too. And then you had the financial crisis and the bailout, just telling everyone, hey, your money is a scam. It's a weapon being used against you to steal your time. All this came together, and it required a lot of commitment and effort from people that wanted to build a vehicle that would escape us from that world. And we did it, and it didn't do it itself. We did it, and now we have to keep the whole thing going. And people are acting like it's just too big now. And I agree, it gets harder the bigger it gets, but it never becomes impossible. Bitcoin is a ship that needs to be steered, and you are responsible for that. If you're using it as a lifeboat, you need to pay attention to the fact that the lifeboat might be made out of the most robust material ever known to man. But if it's being steered towards another iceberg, you're not going to do very well. You need to pay attention to what direction it's going in and not act like the thing you're on is invincible, because that's lazy and complacent. And I appreciate stoicism a lot, but it's not appropriate here. Bitcoin is only as good as we make it, and it's being polluted with nonsense and garbage and people that seek to maliciously undermine it, that have been sitting there twiddling their thumbs since the last of the crypto scams finally fell apart. There's nothing left in there anymore. FTX was the final blow, and there's just no resurrecting it after that. If anything's going to happen in this whole space, it's just all you have now is stable coins and Bitcoin. And stable coins are obviously completely uninteresting for most of the people watching this. I understand why people use stable coins, but it's nothing to do with Bitcoin. It couldn't be more different philosophically. But the fact that they're going to infiltrate now and they're going to come out of that other domain, the idiot container we never appreciated and would always distance ourselves from and hold our nose whenever the name came up, they're here now. They're at all our conferences. They're telling us we need to add opcodes. They're telling us we need to make blocks bigger. They're telling us we need to destroy spam filters. And one of the main perpetrators on this is on those pull requests telling us, hey, it's time for us, not you, but us all, to accept that there are things people want to use Bitcoin for that aren't money, and we just need to accept that. And we're being told this and preached to by malicious actors that are being welcomed into the space and are up there at every conference lecturing people on what needs to happen to Bitcoin. And we know that they only want to push it in a negative direction. And sitting here just saying, oh, well, if they know about Bitcoin, that means they have some Bitcoin. And if they have some Bitcoin, then they want it to do well. The incentives all line up. Everything's going to be fine. I wish it was that simple, but it isn't. Incentives only work. It's just like the adage about markets, let them be free, because it's best being done by rational price discovery is best being done by rational people making informed decisions. That's fine as an adage, but you know that most consumers are not rational people. They're operating with a limited amount of data. Even if they're very clever people, they can only spend so much time analyzing what it is they do. So a lot of people are in Bitcoin and they come to different conclusions. A lot of clever people disagree on topics, and you're like, how can that be? How can that be possible? Surely there's a right answer to this. But that's just the way it goes. And it turns out that now you have a lot of people throwing FUD around with concerns trying to maintain some sort of sovereignty for the people running nodes and keeping them in their essential top of the hierarchy place in this whole structure. Because that's the only, like I've said, it's the only thing that makes Bitcoin unique versus crypto is this attitude about nodes. Nodes are up there, and we just have such a beautiful demonstration of it. We get to say, hey, we fought a war when people were telling us nodes didn't matter, and we won that war. So now we're walking down the road super arrogant and proud of ourselves, and everyone's looking up to us going, yeah, fair enough. You walked the walk, right? You said it, and then you did it. You guys were prepared to nuke the whole thing over maintaining the correct hierarchy, and you won it, even though you might not have. And so now we're undoing all that. People are just cowards saying, if they want to start spamming the chain with crap, and if people want to show up and start uploading treating your node as cloud storage and all that stuff, you might as well just bend over and take it, because if you don't, some bad things might happen that we never cared about back in the day when we were against spam, people building casinos on top of Bitcoin or building shitcoins on top of Bitcoin. When that happened back in the day, it was just, well, that's bad. How do we stop it? It was never, well, do we even want to stop it? And if we do stop it, might we cause some other concerns in other parts of the ecosystem? Why do we only start caring about that now? And I hate the fact that the burden of proof is on me, because I basically have to say I reject that burden of proof entirely. I don't need to prove that spam filters are valid. I just need to point to history and say we've always done it. It only became controversial in 2023 because people were that clueless about who really runs the network. Nodes don't need to relay stuff they don't want to relay. That's final. And you can argue that they degrade stuff by not doing so, but I will argue that it's miners that degrade the P2P layer by adding stuff that doesn't get relayed. Why is it on the nodes to altruistically maintain the integrity of the P2P layer? Sorry, maybe I should explain what I mean contextually there. The argument is if stuff is making it into the chain and we're not relaying it around because we want to filter it out because we consider it spam, that the integrity of the network as a whole is undermined, because the P2P layer, what gets relayed around there between nodes before it gets in the chain, needs to be very similar to what ends up in the blockchain after a while. And if it isn't, that represents a disconnect and a disharmony between the two things. And, this has been an argument that's kind of been fabricated and made up out of nowhere. These things don't need to match. That was never a part of Bitcoin. That what's in my mempool and my expectation of what comes in the next block, they need to be pretty similar to one another. There's no element of Bitcoin that requires that, and that's the ultimate appeal that's being made here. They're saying if your mempool excludes a bunch of stuff that you consider to be malicious activity, which is your right to discern and your responsibility as a guardian of the network, that's just true. But let's grant them this stupid horror story they're trying to paint here, and they call me the global warming, peddler of fear. The fear peddling is being done around something we already do. And that's what's so infuriating. They're saying if you filter spam, if you have a mempool that differs greatly from the next block found by the network, you will suffer and everyone else will suffer. The block will propagate more slowly. Your fee estimation will be worse. And I say, I don't buy it. Why? Because I've always filtered spam, and it was never a problem until 2023. And if they say, well, now it's different because they're including a bunch of stuff that wasn't in any mempools. They're going around the filters you have now, so we need to start getting rid of them. It's not just that you want us to update them and we're not going to. We're going to get rid of the filters that are already there. And they're saying, you better play catch-up nodes. If you don't play catch-up, then you're going to suffer that degraded experience we've been alluding to. Your fee estimation is going to get worse. The centralization of mining is going to get worse because the biggest miners are the ones who can solicit this crap that isn't getting relayed around the network, and the peddlers of this crap are going to connect directly to them. And then that miner is going to earn a bit more money than the others. So you're going to centralize mining. And the other point they always make is about the propagation of the blocks they solve. And I'm saying, I don't buy it. I'm sorry, it all sounds good on paper. I get it. I'm filtering spam, and having blocks contain stuff that I filtered is objectively not as good as if I had a more permissive mempool policy and therefore blocks more closely matched what was in my mempool. But you can also just say that it would be better as well if the blocks miners produced more closely resembled what was in my mempool. So why is it miners are being told, we're being told that miners cannot adjust their behavior at all? They are dumb, profit maximizing algorithms. They are not people, as Unhosted likes to say they are, if essentially being characterized. Why are we being told that miners cannot take into consideration the health of the network? They are just going to do what earns them more money, and that's it. Why are we being told that? If we're being told that, it goes all the way back to the Monero situation. You're going on what's consensus valid and what isn't, and not projecting any judgment onto whether you're going in a good direction or not. And this leads you into this territory where you just say there can't be bugs. Anything that Bitcoin can do and is doing, it needs to be allowed to do, and we cannot adjust anything on that premise except weaken rules. We can just rip out fences and things that have been there for very good reason, little guardrails that have been keeping things, internally consistent. We have this monetary thing and this currency and this network, and they all self-reinforce. And we try to limit activity that deviates from that purpose, and we set up all sorts of signals and things that would try and keep us in that regard. And they say, well, it doesn't matter actually, because this is just a database. And people trying to use it to do that might root around some of those safeguards, and then there's a fallout from that. So we just need to rip them all out super aggressively, and that's what they've been doing. I've commented on the aggression of this in my last video, but the rationale for it, that what I was saying a few minutes ago that really frustrates me, is the fact that the burden of proof still seems to be placed on me and the arguments I'm making. When I again reiterate, it wasn't until 2023 that there was any expectation on nodes to relay as much as possible so that miners didn't accidentally attack the network by filling up blocks full of junk and having them propagate slowly and cause centralization and bottlenecks and things like that. The expectation and onus was always on the miners. Hey, could you not attack the network by filling blocks up with junk? Can you respect what the nodes are relaying? That was always the dynamic before, and that was the language and the approach that was espoused by Core forever until the level of cultural erosion just got too extreme, and the level of complacency and sheer normie to cypherpunk ratio got out of whack, to the point where it's like, all right, we just can't seem to get agreement on the fact that obviously we shouldn't be relaying malicious crap around the network, and we're going to degrade it if we do. Because I can acknowledge that on paper, all of the trade-offs from spam filtration exist. I understand that if you create something like an incentive for a pool like Mara to create Slipstream, they can get themselves an additional revenue stream that wouldn't be available to small miners that can't promise spammers the same amount of block space or the same expediency of confirmation in the chain. I understand that. I just think it's overblown. I also understand the fact that your fee estimation, technically, in some circumstances, is going to not be as accurate as it otherwise might be if you had a mempool that more closely mirrored other people's and more closely mirrored what ended up in the chain. But again, it's just so overblown because fee estimation is such an inaccurate crapshoot anyway that, if you're trying to be stingy with it, you're probably going to have to RBF unless you get lucky and there's a string of blocks that happen faster than 10 minutes. That's just reality of Bitcoin, and you're not going to fix that by filling your mempool up with junk. You're not suddenly going to be able to save fees. You're not suddenly going to be able to be extremely precise with your transaction fees because you've no idea what the next block looks like. Back to my original point there on asymmetry between the contents of blocks miners produce and what was in your mempool just prior to that. There is no premise in Bitcoin, nothing that we can point back to that says, hey, those things need to be pretty similar, and if they're not, we got a problem. And if they differ wildly, the onus is on nodes to play catch up, not miners to fall in line. That's where I really just have the biggest irk, I guess I want to say, with that's why can't I even talk tonight? That's where I most wildly get angry with people that want to adjust the dynamic. People are saying the network is out of harmony with itself. Miners are doing this, but nodes are doing that. So let's change the nodes. Then you don't understand what makes Bitcoin unique, that you do not bend nodes around according to the will of the miners ever. You just never do that. If you're pushing for that, you do not belong here. You don't understand the dynamic of this at all. And people say, a lot of people just go, yeah, a lot of people who get this, people still fighting the last war. I was on a Spaces with Mr. Hoddle earlier, and I accuse him of this like a lot. You're still fighting the last war, because he keeps saying, fight it at the consensus level. If you really mean it and you want to get rid of the spam, change the rules for real. Start threatening to orphan blocks made by miners that include certain types of spam. And I'm saying, I don't want it to get to that. That is not necessary. It was never necessary before. It's the wrong tool for the job. It's way harder to organize, and it's way less effective because of the time frame involved. That it just necessarily means when these people come along and start spamming, and you say, all right, we're going to soft fork in 18 months to prevent your spam, that's meaningless. They will just adapt around it in that time. That it truly is a losing game of whack-a-mole. And you're just not going to be able to get consensus to do something like that. So the anti-spam people know that that's not the right tool for the job. So a few of them will die on the hill out of principle, but generally they're not going to do very well. And it would look like you'd end up in a situation like Ethereum Classic or something where you're like, in principle, I have to do this, and the community just doesn't agree. So I'm going to do this, and then you fork off and you end up dead. That's basically what would happen there. And I say it's fighting the last battle, but the problem is, if you piss off nodes enough, eventually you will get enough people that want to do the soft fork that it happens. I don't have a lot of influence in this. Luke is far more influential than I am. I'm attempting to be a spokesperson, and I'm really I do these, like men will upload a video yelling at a camera on YouTube rather than go to therapy. Like, sure, that's why I do these things, and a lot of people are listening to what I have to say. But this thing can slip out of control very quickly and become something where people get that angry that they just decide to actually do a soft fork over it and start forking out inscriptions or some kind of malicious activity that we just can't get the filtering in gear for, because Core just won't see things that way anymore, and they've been too diluted and too corrupted. So, and I don't want to see that happen, and I'm pulling back on it. And at some point, you're going to get people. Well, you're going to get anti-spammers in my camp that are going to accuse me of gatekeeping and saying, Mechanic's just trying to stop us from doing the real solution, and they're going to go off on their own and do it. And I'm going to be saying, don't do that. And then I'll be accused of the guy who's really working for Core all along, and it's just going to be absurd. And Core themselves are going to be eating popcorn watching us all have a civil war amongst ourselves. There's enough of us for that to happen now. You have 16% of the network doing it. So something like that can easily happen, and I don't want to end up in that scenario. I just want to have the guts to say, look, there's a lot of stuff going on that's irrelevant to Bitcoin's success as a monetary network. It's an abuse of the storage of everyone that is trying to use Bitcoin as a sovereign Bitcoiner and run their own node. They're being used and by piggybackers that want to turn them into unpaid cloud storage. And they're not interested in relaying this stuff, and they want to send a signal out loud and clear to miners that they need to stop doing this. And acting like kids and routing around those filters and filling up blocks full of junk and having people celebrate it by posting stupid pictures of frogs and dick bucks and all that stuff in their block explorers. Like, this is just, it's immature and stupid, and it needs to stop, because if you keep pushing it, you're going to end up causing a lot of disruption, and I don't want it to come to that. Spam filters are not very disruptive. They are not. They're only disruptive they're not disruptive to the income of miners. Even if miners completely adhere to them immediately, it barely makes any difference, because there's still actual financial activity going on. And so much of what miners earn is subsidy. The fact that they're still earning 300 grand every 10 minutes from subsidy, or well, more like 350, means that like conversations around tens or hundreds of dollars extra revenue that comes from spam in each one of those blocks is irrelevant. Like the average transaction fee at the moment, like total in blocks is, I mean, the last one was 600,000 sats. What's that? $700. Like in a context where you just earned 300 grand, $700 makes no difference to anything. So miners don't care. It's not going to be disruptive to them if suddenly runes and inscriptions are just dead because everyone started filtering them and the network said, I'm not doing this anymore. And yeah, maybe 30% of the network is still relaying it, but who are the spammers? Are the spammers sitting there in their stupid communities on Reddit and Discord going, yeah, so it turns out Core just merged a filter that's on by default that filters what we're doing here. The price is going to fall to 0 in 2 minutes, and that's it. It's over. There's going to be no confidence in a scam that's being actively treated with hostility by the network, by the host network. This is why filters work so well. And this is why it's so annoying when people pretend that they're not a perfect, well, when people say they're not a perfect solution, because I'm saying, of course they're not a perfect solution. They're just good enough. Same as Bitcoin itself, right? It's not a perfect solution. You can 51% attack it. And that's, I guess, how I'll round off the video because of the context with Monero. Now, you have this thing where people are just saying, look, spam is possible in Bitcoin. So stop fighting it. Stop doing anything possible that is in your interest to act against it and stifle it and obstruct the flow of it, or even just morally don't participate in it. People keep, like the argument I got in today, I'm going to try and come back to this point because I really do want to round off the video. But the argument that I was making today was filters work. How well do they work? I can't tell you they're 100% effective. In the case of op return, I'll tell you that they were 99% effective because 99% of op returns have been 83 bytes or less, and that is clearly the result of a filter. And then they go on about economic incentives for going around it and stuff, but I'm not prepared to be that generous with it to the opposing side. The size of data carrier size by default defined how big basically all op returns were. But here's the part that always annoys me, and people can't seem to understand the logical thread here, and I'll run through it. I am saying filters work. I'm not saying they're a perfect solution, but the pushback of always going, if they're not perfect, they're completely useless. I'm finding that just to be, that's ridiculous. You're not prepared to have a conversation around, this thing's bad, here's a preventative measure that works to some degree. Is it worth implementing or not? Can never have that conversation with spam apologists, ever. They always just go, it wasn't 100% effective, therefore useless, get rid of it. And then I go, all right, I completely disagree with you and you're obviously just lying. But even if I did disagree, even if I grant you that you're correct, that filters are completely useless at preventing spam from getting in the chain, even though they were 99% effective with data carrier size, even if I tell you, okay, you're right, they're useless, I'm still going to run it because I don't want to participate in relaying scams from him to some mining pool. I don't want to participate in it, and I'm not sold on the benefit of me doing it. And then I get told, you're admitting they don't work. No, I'm not. They work. But I'm telling you that your argument that relies on them not working, which is not true, you then jumping to the next logical step of saying, therefore you might as well not run them, is not true. And I just find I have two reasons to do it. One is that they work, and the second reason is that even if they didn't, it would still mean I wasn't morally culpable. I wasn't participating in something that was an obvious overt attack on the network. So now I'll make my final point and hark back to the original thing I was talking about with Monero. The attitude now is just, if it's possible, don't do anything to try and prevent it. And that's the attitude in Monero now. The price has barely fallen. Like I'm looking at the price here in Monero, which is like the first time I've done it since 2018 or something. Like the price in the last 6 hours has gone down from 252 to 204 to 247. There's a 2% drop in the price for a crypto that's now completely centralized, more centralized than anything else. I would argue you'd have a better, that's literally PayPal at this point. If PayPal say you can't move, we're closing your account, you can't move your money, that's it. And if this guy that's 51% attacking Monero says no one's allowed to transact on Monero, then you can't transact on Monero. You certainly can't mine on it because your blocks will all get thrown away. And the attitude of saying, well, there's nothing we can do about it. Let's just, it's possible and someone is exploiting it. So let's just pretend it's not happening, or let's just pretend that there is no possible countermeasure. That's what's going on in Bitcoin. People saying it's possible to spam the chain, and therefore you must do nothing about it. And here's a couple of bullshit reasons and excuses we've given you for why you might not want to. And I'm saying this is just complete cowardice and ridiculous and indicative. And I have all this historical precedent of endless spam filtration and endless success in that regard and hostility towards the arbitrary data storage use case of Bitcoin. So much precedent for that, all getting thrown out with this groupthink coming out of this corrupted culture that has completely divorced from its roots. Some of the old devs are still around, right? But not many of them. And I mean, I won't mention Luke more than necessary, but Luke is the OG dev, or at least like top 4 or 5 of the devs that have been around in core, for such a long period of time and done so much contribution. So you can ignore someone of that status if you want, but it's a big chunk of, if you want to defer to the experts, you have one of the most respected experts in the space saying this isn't okay and Bitcoin will probably die if people can't acknowledge what's going on here. And dismissing that as nuts is pretty crazy to do when you're looking at, if you're making your Lightning payment and you want to go, who made this possible? It was that guy. And if you're receiving Bitcoins to anything other than, a pay to public key hash or, pay to script hash, then by which I mean it's going to be a SegWit address, then you have him to thank for that as well, for a bunch of reasons. So dismissing his opinions is crazy because a bunch of people are doing a smear campaign against him is perilous, and you shouldn't do it. It's not like I know a lot, but I definitely know how to listen to people that do, and I definitely know how to correct my opinions when they're wrong. So if it can be done, there's no point fighting it. And I'm just not ever going to concede that that's true. I know that we can fight this thing, and I don't want to see this crypto mentality leak into the space and undermine everything. We should be fighting spam with a whole bunch of things, and we should be fighting the cultural rot. It's not about the spam filters, I reiterate. Those are just one element of what's gone wrong here. They indicate that something has fallen out of alignment with itself. The entire community is becoming complacent and forgetting how you hold Bitcoin together and you keep it tight-knit. How do you maintain the monetary characteristics of Bitcoin? You don't let it mission creep into being other things, because those other things will undermine it. They bleed back into the original ecosystem. Parasites affect their hosts. The ideal parasite wants to not affect their host at all. That's biological symbiosis. Arbitrary data getting stored in the blockchain is not a symbiotic relationship. It's a parasitic relationship, because you're asking nodes who don't get paid to do what they do to store all their crap forever to help them out for no gain. That just degrades the purpose for running a node. It's not symbiotic. It's not one of those birds on top of a hippo helping get rid of, bugs and stuff off their back. It's not that kind of relationship. It's just, I'm going to sit here, bleed it dry until it dies. That's all you're seeing with these spammy protocols getting built on top of Bitcoin. The only thing it makes sense to do is be hostile to the people behind it, which means stop inviting them to all the conferences, stop giving them credibility and airtime in developer environments. If you're going to be aggressive with your moderation policies during the discussions around, Bitcoin Core itself on GitHub, kick those people off. Instead, we're kicking people off that are OG Bitcoiners that maybe lost their temper, or even were totally reasonable that just disagree with the ridiculous level of sycophancy you've got to display to get anywhere inside Bitcoin Core development now. It's completely and utterly, all these decisions are made behind closed doors at this point, and the GitHub conversation is just a LARP. They've all decided what they want to do internally, and they do a bit of public performance for show and say, hey, I think we'll do this. All right, we'll do this. It's a complete limited hangout. I'm sorry to keep using that phrase, but that's all there is to it now. Like, they can't stand the heat. They're sick of it. They blame me and go, Mechanic, like, it doesn't know what he's talking about, and he's raised a rabble, of people that are after us with pitchforks. Screw this. We're just going to talk in private, which is what they were doing anyway. And then we'll just do a bit of, box ticking for public performance and maintaining the facade of this being in the spirit of open source. It's just, don't fall for it. It's a charade at this point. So, yeah, that's all. I'll see you guys when I'm back from Finland.